Okay, so next I'm going to talk about intervals and chords. So intervals are basically, to be able to discuss these properly, we have to start with the whole step and the half step because that's what everything's built off of for intervals and chords. And once we've talked about intervals, then we can talk about chords because chords are just made of intervals. So a half step is it's one note to the very next note, whereas a whole step skips one note. So like that's a half step because there's no note in the middle, even though it's a white note and a white note. And that's a whole step. And then this is also a whole step because it skips a white note. So pretty much whole steps skip a note, white or black, one note, only one. Half steps do not skip a note. Whether the next note is white or black doesn't matter. So a whole step is, off of that we can start getting our intervals. A whole step, one note to the next note, skipping just one note in the middle, white or black, is also called a major second. And a half step, one that doesn't skip any notes, is called a minor second. And so the interval of a major second would be essentially a whole step, and the interval of a minor second would be essentially a half step. So off of that, then you get your major third. Well, let's start with, okay, so you got minor second, major second. Then this is actually your minor third. It is a whole step and a half step, or you could just say 1, 2, 3 half steps. And then a major third is 4 half steps, or just 2 whole steps. And a perfect fourth. Fourths and fifths and eighths are perfect. So a perfect fourth is going to be essentially just a half step more than a third, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps. 6 half steps is a tritone, or you could call this an augmented fourth, you could call it a diminished fifth. Those would all be legitimate intervals to call it. The interval of an augmented fourth. And then you've got your perfect fifth, which is 7 half steps. Then you've got your minor sixth, or augmented fifth. Usually you call this your minor sixth. Only if it's written in music as C and G sharp would you call that an augmented fifth. So this is your minor sixth, and it's made out of 8 half steps. Major sixth, which is made out of 9 half steps. Minor seventh. Major seventh. These are all intervals. And then the interval of a perfect octave. And really, you can actually go beyond an octave. I stopped at an octave because it's C to C, but you could go from C to D, which would be the interval of a ninth, or C to E, which would be a tenth. But you pretty much follow the same pattern as if you knocked it down an octave. So like a tenth would be a major third, not a perfect. It would be a perfect. It would be a major tenth because it would have been a major third down an octave. Whereas an 11th would actually be a perfect 11th, I believe, because if you knocked it down an octave, it would be a perfect fourth. And same thing with the fifth and the 8, 9, 10, 11. The fifth and the 12th would both be perfect, and so forth. The 13th would just be major, a major 13th, or a minor 13th if it's the same thing as a minor 6th would have been. That would be a perfect would be a minor 13th. Sorry. So yeah, intervals are just a certain amount of half steps. You know, a perfect fifth is going to be 7 half steps. And I've used that to find my circle of fifths in earlier videos because sometimes, like from the F to the B, that's actually a diminished fifth. So I have to count the half steps to double check to make sure that I'm actually getting a perfect fifth. To make sure that I have the right note. So it's not, it would be the key of B flat has 2 flats, not the key of B. The key of B has 5 sharps. So that's obviously a very big difference. So you've got those intervals. And I talk about these intervals and because you've got your chords are made of intervals. So especially major and minor thirds. Like let's say your standard major chord is built of a major third, and then you've got your major third on the bottom, and then your minor third on the top. Your minor third just switches those two. You've got your minor third on the bottom and your major third on the top. And how do I know those are minor thirds? Like what I said with the half steps. A minor third is 4 half steps, and a major third is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, a minor third, goodness, is 3 half steps, and a major third is 4. So I know that I've got that one's going to have my minor third on the bottom and my major third on the top, because this has 3 half steps and this has 4. So that's your minor, major. An augmented is actually made of 2 majors, which means you go up 1 half step to get that augmented 5. And then that's made out of 2 majors because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in the bottom third and 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top third. And diminished is the same thing except everything goes down. So you've got your minor, and then your fifth goes down to make 2 minor thirds. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you know that that's a diminished. Then what's really interesting was once you get past the minor, diminished, major, and augmented, you can start doing cool 7th chords. So like this would be if you've got your normal old major triad on the bottom. So just as a review, that's a major third on the bottom, 4 half steps, a minor third on the top, which is 3 half steps, and then you've got a major third on the top of that, which is 4 half steps again, and that has a very dissonant sound. But then if you can do your dominant 7 chord, which is actually the most common as a 5 chord, because like in the key of C, a 5/7 going to a 1 sounds really good. And that's actually called an authentic cadence. And this is actually an authentic imperfect cadence because the note on the top isn't the root of the chord. If we were doing like a real authentic perfect cadence, it would be like a 5/7, and then I'd end with the root of the chord and the scale on the top. So where were we? Oh yeah, we've got the sevenths that we're talking about. So we've got to the major 7th and then the dominant 7th, which is just your major 5th with the minor 3rd on the top. And then you've got after that you get your minor 7th, which is you just move the bottom 3rd down to make it a minor chord, and then you keep the top notes the same. And then you've got your half diminished chord comes next, which is when you move the 5th note, your 5th note of the scale, down a half step to make a diminished chord on the bottom, but still a major 3rd on the top. That's your half diminished. And then your full diminished is when you take the top note down as well. So this is only, like the diminished triad, this diminished 7th is only made up of minor thirds. So they're all 3 half steps apart. It has a very cool dissonant sound to it. So those are your 7ths and your chords that they're built off of. Once you know those in their root versions, I was just playing them in their root versions, except for when I was doing the cadences, and then I was doing them in different inversions. Once you know the actual roots, then you can move it into inversions. And inversions, all you have to do for inversions is you have to move up the bottom note an octave. Just move the notes around. You play the same notes just in a different order. Like that is your major 7 in the first inversion. This would be a major 7 second inversion. This is third inversion, and this is back to root. So, and then you can do same thing with dominant. And that makes it really fun because then when you have your dominant, like I was talking about earlier, your dominant 7, that's the dominant 7 in the second inversion. And then it can go to your just plain old 1 chord triad, but in the first inversion. And that's an authentic perfect cadence. Another kind of cadence is a 4 chord. So like in the key of C, you'd have an F chord because that's your 4th note of the C scale. And then you could do your 1 chord and your F chord. So that would be a plagal cadence. That's your 4-1 cadence. And in this case, it's perfect because I ended on the tonic. That's also called the amen cadence because you can kind of hear it in it. Amen. Amen. I'm an alto, so I don't sing the top note. But that's some different things that you can do with cadences. Sometimes, like a half cadence is if you end on your 5 chord, and then an imperfect cadence is if like you're expecting to. Well, an imperfect cadence we already talked about, because that's the one where it doesn't end on the root in the top voice. But you've also got deceptive cadences where you're thinking they're going to go to the 1 and then they don't. They go like 5 to something other than 1. And cadences, they're usually at the end of, well, cadences are always like at the end of phrases or the end of a verse or chorus. And sometimes they're at the end, and they're always at the end of songs. But sometimes it's just the end of a phrase that you've got a cadence. So that's just some stuff on cadences, scales, how they operate, where they are in songs. Melodically, you often will find that the melody goes with the harmony very well because they share notes. Like if you've got your 1 chord, chances are is that if you have a 1, that was like a 1-5-1 progression. Actually, just 1-5 progression. But what that was showing was that your melody actually can usually work off of the harmony. So a lot of times they'll share notes. And actually, a lot of times if you've got a melody and you don't know the harmony, you can guess that it's going to be one of the notes of the melody. So you kind of look at the melody and you think, okay, what is on the downbeats? What is the place in the phrase? Because it's unlikely that a phrase is going to have a 1 chord right in the middle if it has a 1 chord at the very end as well. So you're kind of thinking, what's its point in the phrase? What's its point in the song? Because if it's the last chord of the song, it's probably a 1 chord. I mean, there are deceptive cadences out there that songs end on, but it's not very common, especially like in classical music. So, and a lot of times it's really just like a 1 chord, maybe like a 1 sus chord or even a 1-7 chord if it has an odd sound at the end. But usually it's a 1 chord at the very end. So you can take some of that guesswork out for yourself when you're actually trying to look at a like fake book where it's got the melody but it doesn't have any of the extra stuff. When it just has like the lead sheet with only the melody down, you can actually look at the melody notes, especially on the downbeats, and figure out what your harmony is, or at least make an educated guess at it. So that really helps melodically, because then on the other hand, you've got, when you're trying to come up with a cool melody, you can just take a chord progression that sounds really good and then connect the notes, do different things rhythmically, put in some ornaments, try to have the pitch go up and then come back down. But really, you can just take your chord progression that you've got, that you know works. 1 4 4 5 is a standard that everyone uses, and sometimes with the 6th chord in there, 1 4 5 1. And then you can just take notes of those and practice connecting from one note of one chord to a different note of the other chord. So like the middle of your 1 chord to the middle of your 4 chord to the middle of your 5 chord, or the first note of your 1 chord to the top note of your 4 chord to the middle note of your 5 chord, or whatever. And you can take some of those harmonic theoretical truths that you know and actually use them to be creative and give some guidelines for melody.